This is Rob Wittman, a U.S. representative that gave us a unique view on controversial topics such as
how do you feel about pineapple on pizza?
Well, you know, I my preference is for other toppings on pizza besides pineapple. Pineapple is okay, but it's not my favorite. So.
Could you please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what inspired you to get involved in public service and to run for Congress originally?
Sure. Well, my background is in local government. I actually, right after I got out of college, was very interested in all the things that were going on in my community. I saw that there was a need for certain things to happen. There were no community-based business organizations, so some friends of mine and I formed a junior chamber of commerce, better known as JC's, and there was the Boy Scout troop that I was part of earlier had been disbanded. So a friend of mine who was a state trooper, he and I reformed the Boy Scout troop, and we just saw things that needed to be done there. And from there, some folks in the little town I lived in said, "Hey, wouldn't you like to serve, excuse me, in an appointed position on the planning commission in the town there?" And I agreed to do that. That was back in 1984, and careful what you wish for. Later, I was elected as chairman of the planning commission, and then in 1986 there was a vacancy on the town council, and I ran for that office, was successful in being elected, and I served there for 10 years, 4 of those years as mayor of the town. And then there was a vacancy on the county board of supervisors, and decided to run for the county board of supervisors and serve there for 10 years, 2 of those years as chairman. And then there was a vacancy in the House of Delegates seat in the 99th district in the Virginia General Assembly. So decided to run there. And you can see there's a theme here where there's vacancies. I've never jumped in and run against an incumbent. And then in 2007, there was another vacancy in the first congressional seat in Virginia. So I decided to go ahead and run there. So my whole life has been about, looking for opportunities to serve. Where can I best serve? Where can I best do the work of the people? And I worked for 27 years as a state employee. I'm a scientist by training, so I'm a biologist, and I worked as an environmental health specialist. I learned a lot there and enjoyed that. And I always enjoyed taking public policy and connecting public policy to the elements of science and putting together how do we come up with solutions to the problems that we see around us. That's what fostered my interest. I always had a strong sense to go back and serve, but also to come up with good public policy. And how do you associate science and public policy? How do you do both? And sometimes it's tough to do because there's an element of science and there's an element of political science, I call it, in what happens there. But those are the things that were kind of my background and what led me to where I am today.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of being a congressman and vice versa? What would you say is the most challenging part?
I think the most rewarding part is, people have challenges with their government, and whether it's at the federal level, the state level, and the local level, I get the most satisfaction out of problem solving when somebody has an issue that they're frustrated with. And many times when they contact our office, it's their call of last resort. Many times it's like, I don't know any place else to turn, but I'll call my congressman and see if they can help. So we have what we call a one-stop shop, and that is anybody that calls us, no matter what the problem, we're going to help to guide them to a solution, even if it doesn't involve the federal government, if it involves local government, or even if it's somebody says, there's a stray dog running around in my neighborhood, I don't know what to do. We're going to connect them with the local government and the animal control people and help them to a solution. So that's where I get the highest sense of satisfaction. That is being able to make government work for folks, and many times when we are their call of last resort. The biggest challenge, I would say, is in just the times we find ourselves where there are deep divisions across the nation, and to make sure that we are focusing on having a thoughtful conversation and focusing on how do we find those places where we have some areas in common. And Sometimes we don't, but many times, though, it is worth the time and effort to at least understand where somebody else is coming from, because that is the key to being able to come up with what I call, real world solutions. I tell folks the solutions to today's problems don't rest inside that 45 miles of fantasy land we call Washington. They're right out here with what people deal with every day. And those are where the best ideas come from. And I want to make sure that we get to those. And sometimes folks are so focused on where they are, whether it's philosophically or ideologically. I want to make sure that everybody listens. Listen, I don't expect people to always agree, but I do expect them to take the time to listen and to say, okay, while I may not agree with you, I respect your opinion and your expression of that opinion, and understand that that's part of what makes this nation great, is being able to share those opinions and take the good ideas from both sides. I tell folks, one political party or the other doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas. They're out there, and I believe we have an obligation to do everything we can to get those good ideas to the table to come up with good public policy.
Right. So I know you just touched on this briefly, but given how divided our country and our government seems to be right now, how difficult would you say it is to reach across the political aisle and get legislation passed that both parties can agree on?
Well, listen, I don't think it's that difficult. I've been able to do that in the last Congress. When my party's in the minority, I think it's a matter of taking the time to get to know other members. I think relationships between members is critically important. And what I find is the differences that we have really aren't necessarily political differences. Many times they are differences in the geographic areas that we represent. But remember, where there are differences are also commonalities. And what I find is there are a lot of things out there that we have in common that transcend party lines, that are about something that's unique to my district, but not necessarily unique. And that is, it has something in common with another district. Another great example is finally getting Virginia Native American tribes recognized. For over 400 years, they'd never been formally recognized by the federal government for a whole variety of reasons. And I was able to work across the aisle, work with members in the Senate, and finally get that passed. Again, in a time where I was in the minority here in the House. So I do think that you can get things done. It takes effort, it takes time, and it takes the time to get to know what do other members have in common with you, and that takes hard work. So I like doing that, because I think that's where you end up with the best legislation, is where you are able to take ideas from a variety of different viewpoints and put them together and come up with something good.
Thank you. So looking forward, what do you think is something that you look forward to working with the Biden administration on?
Well, listen, I think there are a lot of great opportunities out there. I think the number one thing that we can work on is infrastructure. Our nation is in need of repairing roads and bridges and airports and our ports. Here in Virginia, the Port of Virginia is extraordinarily important. Lots of opportunities to work on that. The biggest issue, I believe, within infrastructure is building out our rural broadband system. If we've learned nothing else from COVID-19, we know how incredibly important connectivity is. If you are a student and you are now operating in the virtual classroom, connectivity is key. Speed of connectivity is key. If you have a business that is struggling through these times because you don't have the storefront traffic that you used to have, having connectivity so that you can do business online is critically important. Think about where we are with the delivery of healthcare. Being able to do telehealth, and that is to visit a doctor without having to go to the doctor's office and worry about elements of transmission of COVID-19, are incredibly important. All those things rely upon a high-speed internet system, rely on broadband. There have been some great things that have happened recently on broadband. I think we need to commit even more resources to broadband. In the previous COVID-19 relief package, there was about $30 billion additional dollars for broadband. I think we need to do even more. I think that you'll see more happen with broadband in the next 2 years than we've seen happen in the past 10 years. And we know that if we are going to do the things necessary to get this economy back, to make sure students have the educational access that they need, to make sure we have affordable and accessible healthcare, broadband has to be the backbone of that.
In your experience as a legislator,
That's all right.
is it ever frustrating to not always be able to see the changes you want to see, and how do you move past that?
Well, sometimes it is. Many times you focus so much on saying, I need to get this done. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And sometimes it doesn't happen at the pace that you would like. I'll give you a great example. We've been working to try to get a project going to dredge the channel in the lower part of the Chesapeake Bay that comes into the Hampton Roads area, where our ships come in, where our Navy ships come in, where our commerce ships come in, those container ships you see with the big containers on them. We've been working for several years in a row to try to get that project authorized. It didn't get done last year, and we thought, well, we should be high on the list this year. It didn't get done this year. So, it's frustrating. You look at it and go, wow, it would just make sense to do that project. And we've waited in line, we thought, more than enough time to be able to get that done. So, instead of getting frustrated by that and saying, oh gosh, woe is me, I can't get it done, I'll just, I'll worry about what I didn't get done, is what we do is to say, okay, let's have conversations with folks. Let's figure out, how did the decision making take place? What do we need to do in Virginia to make this proposal more competitive? How do we make sure that it does get authorized? So I always look at it in a constructive way to say, if we're not successful, then number one, why weren't we successful? And what can we do to prepare ourselves to be successful in the future? So, you can allow frustration to get you down, or you can use frustration in a positive way and say, okay, I'm going to use that frustration to find out why, and to make things even more competitive, or to have a greater chance, whether it's getting legislation passed or getting a project funded or getting it authorized. I think that there's always opportunity there. Sometimes you have to give yourself a little time to get past the disappointment. I never let myself dwell too long on disappointment, usually a couple of hours, and I'm like, oh gosh, I wish we could have gotten that. But now what are we going to do to move forward?
Moving to a more sensitive topic, the incident at the Capitol was shocking to many Americans across our country. What was your experience like in the Capitol as a United States congressman? And additionally, was wearing a mask sustained when congressional members were moved to the secure rooms?
Well, listen, I was very troubled, as everybody else was. A terrible day up on Capitol Hill. I was actually on my way from the House floor back to my office. I was able to get back into the office safely, but as I watched things unfold, I was just very, very troubled by it. It was, unacceptable by any means. I don't have any problem with people wanting to peacefully protest, but the violence and destruction we saw that day is not who we are as a country. For the requirements of wearing a mask and social distancing are not just about yourself, but also about others. And having a public health background, I'm pretty adamant about making sure that we do those things. So I'm not aware of the specifics about, who was and was not wearing a mask there. I know some other members had some concerns about other members not wearing a mask. I'm not aware of the circumstances behind that, or why somebody wasn't wearing a mask, or where they were, or how they were in proximity to others. But I'll just say this. I know for me, I want to make sure that I set the example and wear the mask. And of course, I'm in my car right now by myself, so not wearing a mask, just as you all are not being in front of your computer by yourself. But I think as we know the protocol, if you are with others, even with family members, you ought to be wearing the mask. You ought to be making sure that you're social distancing.
After everything that unfolded on January 6th, what held you back from voting in favor of Trump's impeachment?
Well, with all the division that we had that day, I was very concerned about where this would lead the nation. The president had 6 days left in his term, had committed to the peaceful transition of power and was on his way out. By the time this was going to get out of the House and get over the Senate, he wasn't going to be president anymore. And the Constitution is pretty specific about saying impeachment is for a president, and it's for taking the president out of power. And so today, as we speak, former President Trump is no longer president, and he's no longer in power. And listen, there are 74 million people that voted for him. I want to make sure that as we move forward with all the division that we've had, I want to make sure as we move forward that we're not exacerbating that. And listen, I understand, both sides disagreeing. I understand wanting to hold people accountable, but I also want to look at, what's in the best interest of the nation moving forward. So that's the reason that I took that position on the impeachment vote.
So following the outpour of protests in connection to the Black Lives Matter movement, in the aftermath to it, would you be open to the idea of extending the length of police academy training, emphasizing alternative methods to excessive force?
Absolutely. I think more training for our law enforcement officers is key. I've talked to many law enforcement officers across the spectrum, from Capitol Police and what they had to deal with to our local law enforcement and to a person there. They're all very, very much in favor of additional resources for training. They all would value additional training. I don't think any of those officers goes in wanting to hurt anybody, but they also want to protect the public and themselves. Being able to identify alternative methods that are able to control the situation and reduce any sort of impact of their interaction with an individual, I think they all want to do. I think we ought to look at every opportunity to be able to do that, to look at non-lethal means of engagement, to look at engagements if you have to be able to control an individual, to look at ways that are less harmful to the individual. I think all those things we absolutely have to look at. And I have yet to talk to a law enforcement officer that doesn't want to do that. So I think that they are fully on board on looking at additional training, the resources for training, looking at other ways that they can do their job and make sure that they keep their neighborhood safe, that they keep themselves safe, and that they keep in mind the impact on the individual that they're interacting with.
Why do you think students should take the time out of their busy schedules to familiarize themselves with how the government works?
Listen, I think it's incredibly important today, especially in these times where we are divided as a nation, for each of you to take the time to ask questions of your elected officials, to understand the scope of the issues that we deal with, is incredibly important. And one thing I would encourage you all to do, and that is, we all, as we grow up, tend to develop our own thoughts and ideas about the things around us. And I always encourage folks to move outside of your comfort zone, to not be afraid to listen to other points of view that you may think, oh, I don't agree with that person, or I don't agree with somebody that has that particular viewpoint, but to take the time to listen and to understand their viewpoint. I know I do that. I may adamantly disagree with somebody, but I want to make sure I take the time to understand their viewpoint, because it creates, I think, within each of us a realization and a respect for where somebody else stands. We don't necessarily have to agree with it, but it does, I think, elevate our appreciation for that individual, the thoughts that they have on why they take a particular stand on an issue. And I think it also tends to diffuse some of the differences and the polarization that we see in our nation when we at least take the time to listen and understand others. And taking the time to understand, what goes into our government, where folks stand on issues, is incredibly important. And you all will be the leaders of tomorrow. You all will be the individuals that are in those leadership positions that will make these decisions, that will focus on being that servant leader to serve others and doing what's best for them. And serving others is about listening to everybody and understanding and respecting everybody. And I appreciate what you all do, because I believe that each of you have that in your heart. Each of you are indeed a servant leader with the heart of someone that wants to help and wants to do things to better the world we live in.